The storm came without warning that October night in 1879, hammering against the weathered boards of Hannah Grace's cabin like the fists of angry spirits. She sat by the dying fire, mending a torn quilt by candlelight, her needle moving in steady rhythm despite the howling wind outside. The cabin groaned under the assault of rain and gale, but it had weathered worse storms in the 3 years since Thomas had passed. Hannah paused, listening. Through the storm's fury, she heard something else, a sound that didn't belong to wind or rain, a heavy thud against her door, followed by silence. She set down her needlework, heart quickening. Living alone on the edge of Colorado territory meant being cautious. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles east, and the town of Redemption Hill lay a full day's ride away. She reached for the rifle mounted above the fireplace, Thomas's old Henry repeater that she'd learned to use with deadly accuracy. Another sound, a low groan, barely audible above the storm. Hannah approached the door slowly, rifle raised. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. No answer came, only the relentless drumming of rain. She lifted the heavy oak bar securing the door, then cracked it open an inch. Cold rain immediately sprayed her face, making her squint. In the darkness, illuminated only by occasional lightning flashes, she saw a figure collapsed on her doorstep. A man, face down in the mud, rain streaming off his body. Hannah's first instinct was to shut the door, bar it tight, and wait for morning. But as lightning split the sky again, she saw the dark stain spreading beneath him, blood mixing with rainwater, creating rivulets of red in the mud. Against every ounce of common sense, she set the rifle aside and knelt beside the figure. She gripped his shoulder, straining to turn him over. The man was heavy, his clothes waterlogged, but she managed to roll him onto his back. Lightning flashed again, revealing his face. Hannah's breath caught. High cheekbones, bronze skin, long black hair plastered to his skull by rain, an Apache warrior. Even semi-conscious and battered, there was no mistaking his heritage. Her hands trembled as she saw the bullet wound in his side, still seeping blood through his torn shirt. She knew she should leave him there. Let the storm take him. Apache raids had terrorized the territory for years, and any white person caught helping one would face the fury of their neighbors or worse. Just last month, the Hendricks family had been attacked on their ranch 20 miles north. The newspapers were full of bounties on Apache scalps, rewards for warriors captured dead or alive. Yet as she looked at his face, she saw not a savage warrior, but a man dying in the mud. A man whose labored breathing reminded her of Thomas in his final hours, fighting for each breath as the fever took him. "Lord, forgive me," Hannah whispered. She hooked her hands under his arms and began dragging him toward the door. He was heavier than Thomas had been, all lean muscle and sinew, and she had to stop twice to catch her breath. The rain soaked through her dress, chilling her to the bone, but she kept pulling until she had him inside. She barred the door again, then stood over the unconscious man, water pooling around them both on the wooden floor. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly. His face bore the marks of violence, a split lip, bruising around one eye. The bullet wound in his side was worse than she'd thought, the flesh torn and angry-looking. Hannah had tended Thomas through his illness, had helped neighboring women with difficult births, had set broken bones and stitched cuts. But this was different. This was harboring an enemy of the territory, a man who could be wanted for any number of crimes. She looked at the door, then back at the dying man. She could still drag him back outside, claim she never saw him if anyone asked. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. Instead, she fetched her medical supplies, the bottle of whiskey she kept for cleaning wounds, clean rags torn from old petticoats, her sewing needle and thread. She had some herbs from her garden willow bark for fever, comfrey for healing. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She knelt beside him and began cutting away his shirt with her sewing scissors. The wound was on his left side, just below the ribs. The bullet had passed through, and which was good, she wouldn't have to dig for it. She cleaned it as best she could with whiskey, noting how he flinched even in unconsciousness. As she worked, she studied him more closely. Scars crisscrossed his chest and arms, some old and faded, others more recent. Whatever battles this man had seen, they had marked him thoroughly. A leather pouch hung around his neck on a rawhide cord. She left it undisturbed, focusing on her work. The stitching took time. Her hands, so steady when mending quilts, shook slightly as she pierced his flesh with the needle. Each stitch was careful, deliberate. She'd seen infection take men stronger than this one, knew how quickly a wound could turn septic. When she finished, she bandaged the wound with strips of clean cloth, then faced the challenge of moving him somewhere more comfortable. She couldn't lift him to the bed, her own bed, the one she'd shared with Thomas. The thought of another man there, especially this man, felt wrong somehow. Instead, she dragged Thomas's old buffalo robe from the trunk and laid it near the fire. With tremendous effort, she managed to roll the Apache onto it. He groaned during the movement but didn't wake. Hannah built up the fire, adding precious wood she'd been saving for the deep winter months. The man needed warmth. His skin felt cold despite the season, and she recognized the pallor of blood loss beneath his bronze complexion. She fetched another blanket, one of her good ones, and laid it over him. Then she sat back on her heels, truly comprehending what she'd done. Outside, the storm continued its assault on her small sanctuary. Inside, an Apache warrior lay unconscious by her fire, his life now tied to hers by the simple act of dragging him through her door. Hannah knew the laws, knew what happened to Indian sympathizers after the Camp Grant massacre, after Sand Creek, after so many bloody encounters. The territory had no mercy for those who aided the Apache. At best, she'd be run out of her home. At worst, she shook her head, banishing the thoughts. What was done was done. She wrung out her soaked dress as best she could, changed into dry clothes, then settled into her rocking chair with the rifle across her lap. Someone had shot this man, which meant someone might be tracking him. If they came to her door, she needed to be ready. The hours crawled by. She fed the fire, checked his breathing, dabbed at his fevered forehead with a cool cloth. Sometimes he muttered in his sleep words in a language she didn't understand, though she recognized the tone, pain, fear, names, perhaps, of people who mattered to him. "You better not die on me," she whispered to him as dawn approached, the storm finally beginning to ease. "I didn't risk my neck just to have you give up now." As the first pale light crept through her windows, Hannah allowed herself to truly look at what the night had brought her. An Apache warrior, possibly wanted for crimes she couldn't imagine, lay wounded in her home. She'd chosen to save him, knowing full well the consequences if discovered. She thought of Thomas, of what he would have done. He'd been a godly man, reading from the Bible every evening, believing in mercy and compassion. "Judge not," he would have said, "lest ye be judged." But Thomas had never faced a choice like this. Hannah touched the small cross at her throat, a wedding gift from Thomas, and made her decision. She would hide this man. She would heal him if she could, and she would pray that her mercy didn't cost her everything. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only the steady drip of water from the eaves. But Hannah knew the real storm was just beginning. The fever came with the second nightfall, burning through him like wildfire across dry prairie grass. Hannah had seen fever before, had watched it take Thomas despite all her efforts. But this was different. This man fought it like he fought everything else, with a fierce, silent determination that both frightened and fascinated her. She knelt beside him, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, watching the rapid rise and fall of his chest. His lips moved constantly, forming words in his native tongue that she couldn't understand. Sometimes his hand would twitch toward his side, where she knew he likely kept a weapon, even in delirium. He was a warrior. "Shh," she whispered, though she doubted he could hear her. "You're safe here. Rest now." The irony wasn't lost on her telling an Apache warrior he was safe in a white woman's cabin. But what else could she say that she'd dragged him from death's door, only to possibly deliver him to another kind of doom? She'd spent the day fortifying her home, moving furniture to hide the bloodstains on her doorstep, burning his torn and bloody shirt in the fire. The leather pouch around his neck she'd left untouched, though curiosity gnawed at her. It felt sacred somehow, private in a way she had no right to violate. Now, as darkness pressed against her windows, she found herself truly alone with her decision. The nearest doctor was in Redemption Hill, but calling for help was impossible. Doc Morrison would ask questions, demand to know how she'd come by such a patient. The whole town would know within hours. So she did what she could with what she had. Willow bark tea for the fever, though getting him to swallow it proved nearly impossible. Honey and whiskey mixed together, spooned between his cracked lips, fresh bandages every few hours, watching anxiously for the telltale red streaks of blood poisoning. His wound, at least, looked better than she'd feared. The edges were clean, beginning to knit together. Whatever else could be said about her hasty stitching, it seemed to be holding. She'd seen men die from lesser wounds, but then again, she'd never tended an Apache warrior before. Perhaps they were made of sterner stuff than the soft townsfolk she knew. As she worked, she studied his face in the firelight. The bruising had darkened to purple and yellow, giving him a battered appearance that somehow didn't diminish the strength in his features. His hands, resting on the blanket, bore calluses from weapons and work. Scars on his knuckles spoke of fights won and lost. Who was this man? What had driven him to her doorstep in the storm? The questions plagued her as she kept her vigil. She'd heard stories in town. Of course, Apache raiders striking at supply wagons, stealing horses, attacking isolated homesteads. But she'd also heard other stories, whispered tales of broken treaties, of reservation lands seized for gold mining, of women and children gunned down by soldiers at peaceful camps. Thomas had always said there were two sides to every story. Sitting here, watching this man fight death with every labored breath, Hannah began to wonder which side of the story he belonged to. Near midnight, his fever spiked dangerously. His body went rigid, trembling with chills despite the sweat pouring off him. Hannah had seen this before, the crisis point where the body either surrendered or found new strength to fight. She did the only thing she could think of. She filled a basin with cool water and began bathing him, running the wet cloth over his burning skin. His muscles tensed at her touch, but he didn't wake. She worked methodically, professionally, though her cheeks burned at the impropriety of it all. A widow, alone, tending a nearly naked man who wasn't her husband. If the church ladies could see her now, they'd have her excommunicated before Sunday service. But propriety seemed a small concern next to saving a life. She continued her ministrations, noting new scars she hadn't seen before, a puckered mark on his shoulder that looked like an old bullet wound, thin lines across his back that could only be from a whip. This man had suffered, whatever his crimes. Whatever had brought that bounty on his head, he'd paid prices of his own along the way. As dawn approached, the fever finally broke. His breathing deepened, evening out to something more natural. The terrible tension left his body, and for the first time since she'd dragged him inside, he looked peaceful. Hannah slumped back in exhaustion, her dress damp with perspiration from the night's work. She'd done it, somehow, miraculously. She'd kept him alive through the worst of it. But now came new worries. He would wake soon, and what then would he attack her, try to flee? She didn't even know if he spoke English. How could she explain that she meant no harm, that she'd saved him not for any bounty, but out of simple human compassion? She rose stiffly, joints protesting the night spent on the hard floor. The morning chores couldn't wait. The chickens needed feeding. The cow required milking. Life went on, even with an Apache warrior unconscious by her hearth. She stepped outside cautiously, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon for riders. Nothing moved in the early morning light except a hawk circling lazily overhead. The storm had washed the air clean, leaving everything sharp and crystal clear. She could see for miles across the rolling grassland, which meant others could see her cabin just as easily. The thought sent a chill through her. How long before someone came looking? How long before questions were asked? She hurried through her chores, gathering eggs with trembling hands, milking Bessie while constantly glancing toward the trail. Every sound made her jump: the crow of her rooster, the lowing of cattle from a distant ranch, the whisper of wind through grass. Back inside, she found her patient unchanged, still lost in healing sleep. She prepared a simple breakfast for herself: cornbread and preserves. Strong coffee, but found she had no appetite. Instead, she sat watching him, wondering what she'd do when those dark eyes finally opened. She'd need to hide evidence of his presence. That much was certain. But where the root cellar was too cold and damp for a wounded man, the barn was the first place anyone would look. Her cabin was small, with few hiding spots. Her eyes fell on the worn rug covering the floor near her bed. Thomas had cut a trap door there years ago, creating a small space beneath the floor for storing valuables during the Indian raids. It wasn't much, just a hole, really. Barely big enough for a man to lie flat, but it might serve in desperation. She pulled back the rug, lifted the hidden door. The space below was dusty but dry. With some blankets, it could work. The thought of forcing a wounded man into such a place made her sick. But what choice did she have? As if sensing her thoughts, the Apache stirred. His eyelids fluttered, and Hannah found herself holding her breath. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. His eyes opened slowly, focusing with difficulty. They were dark as midnight, holding depth she couldn't fathom. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, and she at him, neither moving nor speaking. Then his gaze sharpened, awareness flooding back. His hand moved not toward a weapon as she'd feared, but to his wounded side. He probed gently, feeling the bandages there. Hannah held up her hands, palms out, the universal gesture of peace. "You're safe," she said softly, though she doubted he understood. "I mean you no harm." His eyes tracked around the room, taking in every detail: the door, the windows, her rifle leaning against the wall. A warrior's assessment, quick and thorough. When his gaze returned to her, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not gratitude exactly, not trust, but recognition, as if he understood, on some level deeper than language, what she'd done for him. He tried to sit up, grimacing at the pain. Hannah moved forward instinctively to help, then froze. Would he see her approach as a threat? But he merely watched her, waiting. She moved slowly, telegraphing her intentions, and helped him prop himself against the wall. This close, she could smell the herbs and smoke that clung to his hair, could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into desert sun. "Water?" she asked, miming drinking. He nodded once, a slight dip of his chin. She brought him a cup, helped him drink. His hands shook slightly from weakness, not fear. When he finished, he spoke, a single word in accented but clear English. Why? The question hung between them like a challenge. Why had she saved him? Why risk everything for an enemy? Hannah considered her answers. Christian charity, loneliness. The memory of her husband dying while neighbors stood by, too afraid of catching his fever to help. In the end, she simply said, "Because you needed help." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or a reassessment. He studied her face as intently as she'd studied his, and she wondered what he saw. A foolish widow, a potential ally, or just another white woman whose mercy came with a price. Before either could speak again, the sound of hoofbeats reached them, multiple horses moving fast along the trail. Their eyes met in sudden understanding. Without a word, Hannah pointed to the trapdoor. He looked at it, at her, and she saw the war in his expression, pride battling necessity. The hoofbeats grew closer. The hoofbeats thundered closer, and without another word, the Apache warrior lowered himself into the hiding space. Hannah's hands shook as she arranged blankets over him, then dropped the trapdoor and pulled the rug back into place. She had just enough time to kick his blood-stained bandages into the fire before the riders reached her cabin. The knock came hard and demanding, "Mrs. Grace, open up. It's Sheriff Elwood." Hannah smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and unbarred the door. Sheriff John Elwood stood on her doorstep, his weathered face grim beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Behind him sat 3 deputies on horseback, rifles across their saddles. "Sheriff," she said, proud that her voice remained steady, "what brings you out this way?" Elwood's sharp eyes swept past her, taking in the cabin's interior. "Morning, ma'am. We're tracking an Apache warrior, wounded in a shootout 2 days back. Blood trail led this general direction before the storm washed it out." "An Apache?" Hannah let the appropriate amount of alarm creep into her voice. "Should I be worried?" "This one's particularly dangerous," Elwood said, stepping closer to the threshold. "Goes by the name Silent Wolf. $500 bounty on his head. Dead or alive. You seen or heard anything unusual?" Hannah's mind raced. Silent Wolf. So her patient had a name, or at least a name the white men knew him by. "Nothing, Sheriff, though that storm was fierce enough to hide an army." Elwood nodded slowly, but his eyes remained suspicious. "Mind if we look around? Check your barn. Maybe—" "Of course not," Hannah said, stepping aside. "Though you won't find anything but chickens and an old milk cow." The sheriff entered her cabin, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Hannah's heart hammered as he walked directly over the hidden trapdoor, the rug muffling his steps. He paused by the fireplace, noting the dying embers, then moved to peer out her back window. "You shouldn't be living out here alone," he said. "Not safe for a woman, especially with hostiles about." "I manage well enough," Hannah replied. "Thomas taught me to shoot before he passed." Still, Elwood turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that made her stomach clench. Mighty strange, that Apache heading this direction. Not much out here except your place and the Morrison Ranch. "Perhaps he was making for the mountains," Hannah suggested. "Plenty of places to hide up there." "Perhaps." The sheriff's tone suggested he wasn't convinced. He walked slowly around her small cabin, examining everything. His gaze lingered on her medical supplies, still laid out on the table from the night's work. "Someone sick?" he asked. "I've been preparing poultices," Hannah said quickly. "Mrs. Morrison is due any day now, and she asked me to attend the birth. I like to be ready." It was a good lie. Sarah Morrison was indeed pregnant, and Hannah had helped with her last delivery. Elwood seemed to accept it, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Check the barn," he called to his deputies through the door. Then, to Hannah, "You wouldn't mind if I looked in your root cellar? Man could hide anywhere." "Help yourself," Hannah said, gesturing to the cellar door. Her mouth felt dry as dust, but she forced herself to appear calm, even slightly amused by his thoroughness. Elwood descended into the cellar while Hannah waited above, acutely aware of the wounded warrior hidden mere feet away. She could hear the sheriff moving boxes and barrels below, searching every corner, if he decided to tap on the floors, looking for hollow spaces. "Clear down here," Elwood announced. Climbing back up, he dusted off his hands, frowning. "You said you haven't seen anything unusual. What about before the storm, any riders passing through?" Hannah pretended to think. "The Hendricks boy came by 4 days ago, bringing news from town. No one since then." "And you were here all through the storm?" "Where else would I be? Sheriff?" He studied her for a long moment, and Hannah had the uncomfortable feeling he could see right through her lies. John Elwood hadn't held his position for 10 years by being foolish. He knew something was off, even if he couldn't put his finger on what. The deputies returned from their search. "Nothing in the barn. Sheriff, no sign anyone's been there." Elwood nodded slowly, still watching Hannah. All right then, but I want you to bar your door tight. Mrs. Grace, that Apache is wounded but still dangerous. He's killed 3 men that we know of, stolen horses and supplies from half a dozen ranches. If you see any sign of him, any sign at all, you fire that rifle of yours 3 times. We'll hear it in town and come running." "I understand," Hannah said. "Thank you for your concern. Sheriff." Elwood moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, one more thing. That Apache Silent Wolf, he speaks English. Learned it from missionaries before he turned renegade, so don't let him fool you with any sad stories. He's a killer, plain and simple." Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Good day, ma'am. Remember 3 shots if you need us." She stood in the doorway, watching until the riders disappeared over the hill. Only then did she allow herself to sag against the door frame, legs suddenly weak. She'd done it. She'd lied to the law, hidden a wanted man, made herself a criminal. After barring the door, she hurried to the trap door and pulled it open. Silent Wolf, she supposed she should think of him by that name, now lay still in the cramped space, face beaded with sweat from pain or stress. "They're gone," she said softly. He opened eyes that had never been closed, and she realized he'd been awake the entire time, listening to every word. Slowly, painfully, he pulled himself out of the hiding place. She tried to help, but he waved her off, using the wall to steady himself as he stood. "3 men, he said, his English careful but clear. "They lie." Hannah frowned. "What?" "I killed no one, took no horses." He pressed a hand to his wounded side, face tight with pain. "I took back what was stolen, sacred things. They shot me for it." She studied his face, looking for deception, but his dark eyes held hers steadily, and she found herself believing him. Perhaps it was foolish. Perhaps she was being taken in by a clever lie, but something in his manner spoke of truth. "Sacred things?" she asked. He touched the leather pouch at his neck. "Not this. This is personal. But they took medicine bundles from our holy cave, sold them to collectors back east. I went to get them back. And they shot you for it." "They shot me because I am Apache," he said simply. "The rest is just excuse." Hannah turned away, busying herself with banking the fire. The conversation was moving into dangerous territory. It was one thing to harbor a wounded man out of Christian charity. It was another to begin believing his story, to start seeing him as a person wronged rather than a criminal. "You should not have lied for me," Silent Wolf said behind her. She turned back to find him watching her with that intense gaze. "Would you prefer I told the truth?" "I would prefer you had left me in the storm," he said. "Now you are in danger too." "I made my choice," Hannah said firmly. "I'll live with the consequences." He studied her for a long moment. "Why do you live alone? Where is your man?" The question caught her off guard. "My husband died 3 years ago. Lung fever. No family, no one to protect you." She bristled at that. "I protect myself." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen from him. "Yes, I see that." He swayed suddenly, and she moved instinctively to steady him. This time, he didn't wave her off. His skin felt hot under her hands, and she frowned. "You need to rest. The fever may return." He allowed her to help him back to the buffalo robe by the fire. As he settled himself, grimacing, she noticed fresh blood seeping through his bandages. The climb in and out of the hiding space had reopened his wound. "I need to change those," she said, gesturing to the bandages. He nodded, lying back, as she worked, carefully removing the soiled cloth. He spoke again. "The sheriff will return. He suspects." "Maybe," Hannah admitted, "but he has no proof." "He will watch your cabin, have men watch the trails." She tied off the fresh bandage. "Considering, then you'll have to stay until you're healed enough to travel safely. A few more days at least." "And then," she met his eyes, "then you leave." and we forget this ever happened." He was quiet for a moment. "You would trust Apache warrior in your home for days. You would trust a white woman who could collect $500 for turning you in." They stared at each other, and Hannah felt something shift between them. An understanding, perhaps. Or maybe just the recognition of mutual vulnerability. He needed her protection, and she had already committed herself past the point of return. "My name," he said finally, "is not Silent Wolf. That is what they call me because I do not scream when they capture me. My true name is—" He said something in Apache that she couldn't hope to pronounce. "What does it mean?" she asked. He thought for a moment, translating. "One who sees through, like looking through clear water to stones beneath." "And what do you see when you look at me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His dark eyes held hers. A woman who builds walls but leaves the door unbarred. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Hannah would wake before dawn, check on her patient, then tend to her chores while constantly watching the horizon for riders. Silent Wolf, she couldn't pronounce his Apache name, though he'd tried teaching her, grew stronger each day, the resilience of his body remarkable to witness. By the fourth day, he was sitting up without help, fashioning snares from strips of leather he'd unraveled from his worn moccasins. She watched, fascinated, as his brown fingers worked with practiced efficiency. "For rabbits," he explained, noting her interest. "You have little meat stored for winter." It was true. She'd been planning to trade eggs and preserves in town for salt pork and beef, but now that was impossible. Going to Redemption Hill meant questions she couldn't answer. Suspicious looks, whispers that might reach Sheriff Elwood's ears. "I can hunt when I'm gone," she said, but even to her own ears, the words sounded uncertain. He looked up from his work. "With rifle you waste bullets, make noise, bring curious men to see who shoots." He was right, of course. She'd been relying on Thomas's rifle for protection, but for practical hunting. It was far from ideal. He held up the completed snare, showing her the intricate knots. "I teach you, silent hunting, Apache way." That afternoon, she helped him walk to the edge of her property, where scraggly brush gave way to prairie grass. He moved slowly but steadily, one hand pressed to his healing wound. She carried the snares and watched as he showed her how to read the land, tiny trails through the grass where rabbits ran, droppings that revealed their favorite feeding spots. "Here," he said, kneeling despite the obvious pain it caused him. "See how grass bends fresh. Maybe this morning." His hands guided hers in setting the snare, showing her how to anchor it, how to position it at exactly the right height. His touch was impersonal, teacher-like, but Hannah found herself aware of the calluses on his palms, the warmth of his skin against hers. "You learn quick," he said, sitting back on his heels. "I had a good teacher," she replied, then felt heat rise in her cheeks at how that sounded. If he noticed her embarrassment, he gave no sign. Instead, he pointed to a hawk circling overhead. "He hunts too. Watch how he moves, patient, waiting for right moment." They sat in the grass for a while, silent, watching the hawk. The autumn sun felt warm on her face, and for a moment, Hannah could almost forget the danger, the impossibility of their situation. It felt strangely peaceful, sitting here with this man who should have been her enemy. "Your husband," he said suddenly. "He was good man." "Yes," Hannah said softly. "Thomas was kind, gentle. He read to me from the Bible every evening, believed in treating everyone with fairness." "Even Apache?" She considered the question honestly. "I don't know. We never— The Indian troubles were always somewhere else, other people's problems. Thomas died before they reached our valley." Silent Wolf nodded slowly. "Maybe better. Good men sometimes do bad things when fear comes." That evening, as she prepared supper, a thin stew stretched with wild onions he'd shown her how to find, he worked on repairing her broken axe handle. She'd been meaning to fix it for months, making do with a hatchet for chopping wood. His hands moved surely, shaving wood with a small knife he'd kept hidden in his moccasin. "You're handy to have around," she said, attempting lightness. He glanced up, that ghost smile returning. Apache man must know many things: hunt, fight, make tools, build shelter. Otherwise, no woman wants him. It was the first time he'd mentioned Apache women, Apache life beyond conflict with whites. Hannah found herself curious despite knowing she shouldn't be. Do you have a woman, a wife?" His hand stilled on the axe handle. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she died 2 winters ago. Soldiers came to winter camp while men were hunting. The words were flat, emotionless, but Hannah heard the pain beneath them. She wanted to say she was sorry, but the words seemed inadequate, almost insulting. White soldiers had killed his wife, and here he sat in a white woman's cabin, dependent on her mercy. "Children?" she asked quietly. No children." He resumed his work on the axe handle. The conversation clearly closed. After supper, as had become their custom, she read aloud from the only book she owned besides the Bible, a worn copy of Ivanhoe that Thomas had treasured. Silent Wolf listened with intense concentration, occasionally asking her to explain a word or concept. His questions revealed a sharp intelligence, a mind that grasped complex ideas quickly. "These knights," he said one evening, "they follow rules in fighting even with enemies." "It's called chivalry," Hannah explained, "a code of honor." He made a sound that might have been amusement. "Apache have codes too, but white men say we are savage because different codes." She couldn't argue with that. As the days passed, she grew used to his presence in ways that surprised her. The cabin felt less empty with him there. She found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to his quiet observations about the world outside her windows. He noticed things she'd never seen, the way certain birds announced weather changes, which plants could ease toothache, how to predict frost by the behavior of insects. "You know so much," she said one night as he showed her how to weave cordage from yucca fibers. "Learning is surviving," he replied. "Apache child learns or dies. Hard teacher, but good one." She thought about her own childhood safe, sheltered, learning embroidery and hymns while Apache children learned to read sign in broken twigs and bent grass. Different worlds, impossibly far apart. Yet here they sat, sharing skills across that divide. On the 7th night, she woke to find his sleeping place empty. Panic seized her. Had he been captured? Then she saw him standing by the window, silhouetted against the stars. "What is it?" she whispered, joining him. "Riders," he said, "far off, moving slow, watching." She squinted but saw nothing. "How can you tell?" "Dust in moonlight. They stop, start, not travelers going somewhere. Hunters, looking for something." Fear crawled up her spine. "Sheriff's men, maybe, or others wanting bounty." He turned from the window. "I bring danger to you. Should leave." "You're not healed enough," she protested. "Your wound." "Will heal or not. Better than you hanging for hiding me." The word hanging made her shiver. She knew he was right, had known from the beginning that this couldn't last. But the thought of him leaving, of the cabin returning to its empty silence, felt wrong. "A few more days," she said, "until you're stronger." He studied her face in the moonlight. "Why you care what happens to Apache warrior?" She didn't know how to answer that. How could she explain the way her heart had changed in these days? How his quiet presence had filled spaces in her life she hadn't known were empty? How teaching and learning from him had awakened something in her that had been sleeping since Thomas died? "Because," she said finally, "I've spent 3 years just surviving, with you here. I remembered what it's like to live." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. "Hannah Grace," he said, the first time he'd used her full name. "You are dangerous woman." "Me?" She almost laughed. "I'm nobody, a poor widow scratching out a living on the edge of nowhere." No, his voice was serious. You are woman who sees with clear eyes, who chooses with brave heart. This is most dangerous kind. Before she could respond, he dropped his hand and moved back to his bedroll. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible line crossed. As she returned to her own bed, Hannah knew that however many days they had left, everything had changed. The next morning, she found 3 rabbits in her snares. The autumn evening cast long shadows across the cabin floor as Hannah prepared their simple meal. She'd grown comfortable with their routine, the quiet companionship, the shared tasks, the way he'd taken to helping with repairs around her homestead. But tonight felt different. There was a restlessness in him, a tension that made her nervous. After they'd eaten, he sat by the fire, unusually still. His dark eyes reflected the flames as he finally spoke. You asked once why they hunt me. Tonight, I tell you true story. Hannah set down her mending, giving him her full attention. In all their days together, he'd been guarded about his past, offering only fragments. This felt like a gift or perhaps a farewell. My name, he began. My true name means one who sees through. My grandmother gave it to me when I was boy. She said I could see past surface of things, see what was hidden beneath, like looking through clear water to stones below. He touched the leather pouch at his neck. This holds earth from Sacred Mountain where I was born. Every Apache carries piece of homeland. But there are other sacred things, things that belong to all people, not just one man. Hannah waited, sensing the weight of what he was about to share. In mountains north of here, there is Cave, old place before Apache. Other people worshipped there. Cave holds medicine bundles, prayer sticks, things blessed by generations of holy men. Not gold, not silver. White men would see only feathers and bones and painted wood. But to us, more precious than all gold in earth. His hands clenched and unclenched as he continued. 3 months ago, men came. Collectors, they called themselves, from big city back east. They had guides, soldiers to protect them. They took everything. Said it was for museum, for science. But I followed, watched. They sold sacred things to private men who keep them like trophies. So you went to get them back, Hannah said softly. Not just me, 5 of us went. But others were caught, killed. Only I reached the traders' camp. I took back what was ours, nothing else. No horses, no guns, no gold, though they had much. Only sacred things. His voice turned bitter. But to them, Apache stealing is Apache stealing. They say I killed guards, but I killed no one. Only knocked one man down who tried to stop me. The 3 men Sheriff Elwood mentioned. Lies? The word came sharp. 3 men died. Yes, but not by my hand. They shot each other fighting over reward money after I escaped. But easier to blame Apache than admit white men's greed killed them. Hannah believed him. Something in his eyes. In the way he held himself, this was truth, painful and raw. I almost made it back to mountains, he continued. But they caught me at river crossing, shot me as I swam. Current carried me away, and I ran through storm until I fell at your door. He looked at her directly. The Great Spirit has humor, sending Apache warrior to white woman's door for salvation. What happened to the sacred things? Hannah asked. Pain flickered across his features. Hidden, wrapped in oilcloth and buried where only I know. If I die, they die with me. Better lost than defiled. You're not going to die, Hannah said firmly. All men die. Question is how. He leaned forward, firelight playing across his scarred face. You asked my name, but I have not asked yours, your true name, not what others call you. Hannah frowned. Hannah Grace, that's my name. No, that is, sounds others use. What is name written on your spirit? Who are you when no one watches? The question caught her off guard. Who was she, Thomas's widow? The lonely woman at the edge of the settlement? Or something else? Something that had been sleeping until this strange dangerous man awakened it. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know," he said quietly. "I watch you these days. You are woman who guards empty nest. You tend home for ghosts. Keep life ready for those who will not come. But inside, fire still burns. Just needs wind to make it rise again." Tears stung her eyes. How had this Apache warrior seen so clearly what she'd hidden even from herself? The empty cabin she maintained as if Thomas might walk through the door. The baby clothes still folded in the trunk, though she'd lost the child before it could draw breath. The life she'd put on hold, waiting for something that would never come. "My wife," he said suddenly. Her name meant Singing River, always moving, always making music. When soldiers killed her, I thought all music died too, but sitting here, listening to you read strange stories of nights, watching you learn snares, seeing you risk everything for enemy, I hear new song, different, not river, more like wind in deep canyon, soft, but with power. Hannah's hands trembled. "You shouldn't say such things." "Why? Because I am Apache, because you are white, because world says we must hate." He shook his head. "World says many foolish things. I trust only what I see. And I see woman with iron spirit dressed in soft cloth. Woman who knows loss but chooses kindness. Woman who makes wounded warrior remember he is also man." "Stop!" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Please." "You think I don't know it's impossible?" His voice roughened. "You think I don't lie awake knowing that in days I must leave, never see you again. But I am one who sees through, and I cannot pretend blindness. Not about this." Hannah stood abruptly, needing distance. She moved to the window, staring out at the darkening prairie. Behind her, she heard him rise, moving with the careful grace of a man still healing. "I have frightened you," he said. "I apologize. We'll not speak of this again." "You haven't frightened me," she said to the window. "You've terrified me, because I feel it too." The admission hung between them like a living thing. She felt him move closer, not touching, just standing near enough that she could feel his warmth. "In Apache way," he said softly, "when man has feelings for woman, he must prove worthy, bring gifts to her family, show he can provide, protect, but you have no family, and I have nothing to give except truth." She turned to face him then, seeing in his dark eyes a vulnerability she hadn't expected. This warrior who'd faced death without flinching was laid bare by emotion. "The truth is gift enough," she said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hannah Grace, woman who guards empty nest, you have given me more than life. You have given me reason to want it." "Don't," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "In a few days, you'll leave. We'll never see each other again. This will only make it harder." "Harder than pretending." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Harder than wondering always what might have been said." She had no answer for that. Instead, she did something that would have scandalized every proper woman in Redemption Hill. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative. Nothing like the passionate embraces in the romance novels the church ladies pretended not to read. It was a question and an answer, a hello and a goodbye, a moment stolen from an impossible situation. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am called one who sees through," he murmured. "But you, Hannah Grace, you are one who is seen, and I see you, all of you, bright as sun on water." They stood there as darkness fell completely, holding a moment that couldn't last, feeling the weight of all the reasons they couldn't be together pressing down like stones. But for now, for this one evening, they allowed themselves the gift of truth spoken aloud, of recognition across an impossible divide. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. Tonight, they had honesty, and that was more than either had dared hope for. The morning after their confession came gray and cold, with frost edging the windows. Hannah woke to find Silent Wolf already up, standing guard at the window as had become his habit. But something in his posture made her stomach clench with dread. "What is it?" she asked, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. "Smoke," he said quietly. "From direction of town, and riders on the East Ridge. Watching." She joined him at the window, but saw only empty prairie. "I don't see anyone." "They are there, waiting." He turned to her, his face grave. "Someone has spoken against you." Before Hannah could respond, the sound of a wagon reached them, not the usual quick pace of riders, but the deliberate approach of someone who knew exactly where they were going. She peered out and recognized the bulky form of Josiah Willard, the blacksmith from town, driving his supply wagon. "It's all right," she said, though unease prickled her spine. "That's Mr. Willard. He shoes horses, men's tools. Thomas knew him well." But Silent Wolf had already moved to the trapdoor, understanding without being told. As he lowered himself into the hiding space, their eyes met briefly. The warmth of last night seemed like a distant dream now, replaced by cold reality. Hannah barely had time to drop the rug in place before Willard's knock rattled the door. She opened it to find the blacksmith standing there, his broad face attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Mrs. Grace," he said, tipping his hat. "Brought out those hinges you asked about last month. Thought you might need them before winter sets in proper." Hannah hadn't asked about hinges, but she forced herself to smile. "That's kind of you, Mr. Willard. Would you like some coffee?" "Don't mind if I do." He stepped inside without waiting for further invitation, his eyes sweeping the cabin with obvious interest. "Gets mighty cold. Working metal in this weather." She busied herself with the coffee pot, aware of his gaze following her every movement. Willard had never shown particular interest in her welfare before. Why now? "Living alone must be hard," he said, settling his bulk into Thomas's old chair. "Especially with all this Indian trouble about." "I manage," Hannah replied, keeping her voice neutral. Still, a woman needs protection, neighbors looking out for her. He accepted the coffee cup, his thick fingers wrapping around it. "Folks in town been worried about you." "That's kind, but unnecessary." "Is it?" Willard's eyes narrowed slightly. "See, I was out hunting last week. Thought I saw smoke from your chimney one morning, but when I came by to check on you, seemed like nobody was home. Door barred, no answer to my knocking." Hannah's mind raced. "I must have been in the root cellar. Sometimes I don't hear visitors when I'm down there." "Maybe." He sipped his coffee loudly. "Funny thing, though, saw tracks around your place. Moccasin tracks, looked like, not boots." "Peddlers come through sometimes," Hannah said. "Indians from the reservation, selling baskets and such." These weren't peddler tracks, just one man, and seemed like he knew his way around your property pretty well. Willard set down his cup with deliberate care. "You haven't had any unusual visitors, have you, Mrs. Grace?" The lie came smoothly. "No one, Mr. Willard, though I appreciate your concern." He stood slowly, his massive frame seeming to fill the small cabin. "Thing is, Mrs. Grace, there's talk in town. Sheriff's been asking questions, and some folks remember things, like how you tended that Mexican family what had the pox, even when decent people stayed clear, or how you gave food to those Irish railroad workers when they came begging. Christian charity. Some might call it that. Others might say you got a soft spot for folks that don't belong." He moved toward the door, then paused. "That Apache everyone's hunting, he's killed good men. White men with families. Anyone hiding him would be spitting on their graves." "I understand," Hannah said stiffly. "Do you—" Willard's voice dropped lower. "Because I'd hate to think ill of you. Mrs. Grace, you being Thomas's widow and all. He was a good man, respected in town. Wouldn't want his memory tarnished by foolish choices." The threat was clear beneath the polite words. Hannah lifted her chin. My choices are my own, Mr. Willard, as are their consequences. That they are. He studied her for a long moment. I'll be heading back to town now. Might mention to the sheriff that I checked on you. Found everything proper. Unless, of course, I have reason to think otherwise. You've no reason to think anything, Mr. Willard. Good, good. He opened the door, then looked back. Oh, one more thing. That $500 bounty sheriff raised it to $700. Lot of money for folks struggling to make it through winter. Might make a man do things he wouldn't normally consider, even turn on neighbors. After he left, Hannah stood frozen until the wagon sounds faded. Only then did she lift the rug and help Silent Wolf from his hiding place. His face was tight with controlled anger. He knows, he said simply. He suspects. That's different. No, he knows. Came to warn you. Give you a chance to turn me in yourself. When you don't, he'll claim bounty. Silent Wolf moved to the window, watching the horizon. Those riders still there, waiting to see what you do. Hannah sank into a chair, the full weight of their situation crushing down. He'll go to the sheriff. Tell him about the tracks, the smoke. They'll search the cabin properly this time. Yes. You need to leave tonight, before they come. Silent Wolf turned from the window. What? Not, you need to leave. You cannot stay now. They will arrest you. Maybe worse. Frontier justice does not favor women who help enemies. Hannah's hands trembled as she pressed them to her face. Leave. Leave the cabin. Thomas built with his own hands. Leave his grave on the hill. The only life she'd known. I can't, she whispered. Silent Wolf knelt before her chair, gently pulling her hands from her face. Hannah, look at me. She met his dark eyes, saw the urgency there. Your husband is gone. This empty nest you guard, it holds only ghosts. Stay, and you join them. His hands tightened on hers. I brought this trouble to you. I will not leave you to face it alone. Where would we go? How would we? She stopped, overwhelmed by the impossibility of it all. I know places in mountains, hidden valleys where no white men go. My people, some still live free, away from reservation. They would accept you for my sake. Your people would accept a white woman. They would accept woman who saved warrior's life, who chose honor over easy path. He stood, pulling her up with him. But must decide now. By sunset, too late. Hannah looked around her cabin at the quilt she'd been mending, the dishes on the shelf, the rifle over the fireplace. Everything familiar, everything safe. Then she looked at Silent Wolf, this man who'd crashed into her life and shown her she'd been merely existing, not living. What do I take? She asked quietly. Relief flashed across his features. Only what you need for traveling. Warm clothes, food that won't spoil, medicine if you have it. Leave everything else. Must look like you go to town for supplies, not running away. They worked quickly. Hannah's hands shaking as she packed. A change of clothes, dried beans and jerky, her medicine kit, the Bible that had been Thomas's. She hesitated over the silver locket with Thomas's photograph, then clasped it around her neck. Some bridges shouldn't be burned, even when crossing them for the last time. Ready? Silent Wolf asked as the sun peeked overhead. She looked once more around the cabin, memorizing every detail. Then she squared her shoulders. Yes. They slipped out the back, moving toward the barn. Hannah saddled her old mare while Silent Wolf kept watch. His wound was still tender. She could see it in how he moved, but he showed no weakness. The watchers? She asked. Still there, but they watch front of cabin. We go back way, through coulee. I know path. As they led the horse out, Hannah stopped. Wait! She ran back to the cabin, grabbed paper and pencil. Quickly, she wrote, Gone to help with Morrison baby. Back in 3 days. She left it on the table where anyone searching would find it. It might buy them time. make the watchers think she'd left on legitimate business. When she returned, Silent Wolf nodded approval. Smart, like Apache woman. They set off, Hannah walking beside the mare while Silent Wolf led the way. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller, fainter, until it was just another speck on the vast prairie. Hannah didn't look back again. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, a life she couldn't imagine, but also possibility. Also him, also a chance to stop guarding empty nests and start building something new. The sun was beginning its descent when they heard the hoofbeats many horses, riding hard from the direction of town. The winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a vengeance that caught even the old-timers by surprise. Hannah had made it back to her cabin just as the first storm hit, her story about helping with the Morrison baby accepted without question. But everything had changed in those 3 days away. Silent Wolf was gone, vanished into the mountains as planned. They had parted at Elk Creek, where his people had hidden horses for him. The goodbye had been brief, a touch of hands, a look that said everything words couldn't, and then he was riding away, disappearing into the tree line like smoke. When the snow melts, he'd said, that was all. No promises, no declarations, just those 4 words and the weight of everything unspoken between them. Now Hannah faced the consequences alone. The first sign of trouble came the day after her return. Mrs. Morrison arrived in her wagon, face pinched with something more than winter cold. Thought you should know, she said without preamble, not even accepting Hannah's offer of coffee. There's talk in town. Ugly talk. Hannah kept her expression neutral. About what? About you harboring that Apache. Willard's been flapping his jaw, saying he saw signs. Mrs. Morrison's eyes were sympathetic but wary. Sheriff's been asking questions. Where you were those days he came calling. Why you needed so many medical supplies. I've done nothing wrong, Hannah said quietly. Maybe not, but that don't matter much when folks get riled up. The older woman hesitated, then added, I'm grateful for your help with my babies. Hannah, you know that, but I got to think of them first. You understand. Hannah understood perfectly. She was being cut off, isolated, marked as a sympathizer. Of course. After Mrs. Morrison left, Hannah sat in her empty cabin and faced the truth. The community that had tolerated her as Thomas's widow would no longer protect her. She was alone in a way she'd never been before. The second storm brought Sheriff Elwood back to her door. This time, he didn't bother with pleasantries. Going to ask you straight out, Mrs. Grace, he said, snow dusting his shoulders. Did you harbor that Apache? Hannah met his gaze steadily. I've seen no Apache warriors. Sheriff, that's not what I asked. His eyes were hard as flint. Did you harbor him, yes or no? I've done nothing against the law. Aiding a wanted man is against the law. Lying to a lawman is against the law. He stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. I know he was here, Mrs. Grace. Found blood traces you missed, boot prints that match his. You want to change your story? I have nothing to change. Elwood's face darkened. Pride goes before a fall. Woman, you'd best remember that. He left without another word, but Hannah knew it wasn't over. Not by far. The isolation deepened with each passing week. No one came to trade. When she ventured to town for supplies, backs turned. Conversations stopped. At Paulson's general store, her money was taken but no words exchanged. Even the children were hurried past her on the street. Indian lover, someone hissed as she loaded her meager purchases. Winter tightened its grip. The woodpile Thomas had laid in 3 years ago was nearly gone, and Hannah couldn't manage the heavy work of splitting logs alone. She burned furniture instead chairs first, then the table. Finally, even Thomas's bookshelf. Anything to keep the fire alive. Food became scarce. The snares Silent Wolf had taught her to make caught some rabbits, but not enough. Her root cellar stores dwindled. The chickens stopped laying in the cold, and she was forced to butcher them one by one. When the last hen went into the pot, she knew she was in trouble. Christmas passed unmarked except for a reading from Thomas's Bible. Hannah sat wrapped in every blanket she owned, the empty cabin echoing around her. She thought of Silent Wolf, wondered where he was, if he was warm, if he thought of her. The kiss they'd shared seemed like something from another lifetime. "When the snow melts," she whispered to the dying fire, but the snow kept falling. January brought the worst blizzard in memory. For 3 days, Hannah couldn't even reach the barn. When it finally cleared, she found Bessie, her milk cow, dead in her stall. The loss of milk and potential meat was devastating, but worse was the silence. Even that familiar morning lowing was gone now. By February, Hannah was surviving on thin porridge and melted snow. The firewood was gone. She burned her wedding trunk, letters from Thomas's family, anything that would catch flame. Her hands, once smooth from indoor work, were cracked and bleeding from the cold. She grew lightheaded from hunger, sometimes seeing Thomas in the corners of the cabin, sometimes hearing Apache drums in the wind. One particularly bitter night, she woke to find her fire dead. The last ember faded to ash. No wood remained, nothing left to burn except Thomas's Bible, and she couldn't bring herself to do that. She huddled under every blanket and cloth in the cabin, but the cold crept in like a living thing, stealing feeling from her fingers and toes. This is how it ends, she thought with surprising calm. Frozen in the cabin Thomas built, paying the price for one act of compassion. There was poetry in it, she supposed, grim poetry, but poetry nonetheless. She closed her eyes, thinking of warm autumn afternoons, of a warrior's hands teaching her to set snares, of a kiss that tasted like possibility. If these were to be her last thoughts, at least they were of something more than mere survival. In her dreams, or was it delirium, she heard horses, many horses, moving through the snow. Apache war cries echoed across the frozen prairie, but she was too far gone to fear them. What more could anyone take from her now? The door crashed open, bringing a swirl of snow and cold. Hannah tried to focus, but her eyes wouldn't cooperate. Shapes moved in the doorway, tall shapes, wrapped in furs. "Hannah!" She knew that voice, though it seemed impossible. Hands lifted her, gentle despite their strength. Someone was wrapping her in a warm buffalo robe, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. "Hannah, look at me!" She forced her eyes open. Silent Wolf's face swam into focus, lined with worry and something else, determination, anger at finding her like this. "Too cold," she managed through chattering teeth. "Not anymore," he said firmly. More Apache warriors entered the cabin, gathering what little remained of her possessions. "We go now. My people wait." She wanted to protest, to ask how and why and what would happen, but darkness was pulling at her. The last thing she felt was the rhythm of a horse beneath her, strong arms holding her secure, and warmth, blessed warmth, seeping back into her frozen bones. When she woke properly, she was in a lodge filled with smoke and warmth and the soft sounds of an unfamiliar language. Women's faces looked down at her, curious but not unkind. Someone spooned broth between her lips, rich, fatty, life-giving. "The worst is over," Silent Wolf said from somewhere nearby. "You are safe now." Safe. The word seemed foreign after months of fear and isolation. But as warmth and food worked their magic, as gentle hands tended her frost-bitten fingers, Hannah began to believe it might be true. She had been cast out for showing mercy to an enemy. Now that enemy's people were showing mercy to her, the irony would have made her laugh if she'd had the strength. Instead, she slept, and for the first time in months, she didn't dream of empty cabins and accusing eyes. She dreamed of spring, of snow melting, of new beginnings in a world she was only beginning to understand. The snow was melting from the distant peaks when Silent Wolf returned to the valley where Hannah had spent her winter among his people. She saw him first from the hillside where she'd been gathering early spring herbs with the women, his familiar silhouette appearing on the ridge like something from a dream. But he wasn't alone. Behind him rode 20 warriors, painted and armed, leading horses laden with goods. The camp burst into activity at their approach, children running, women calling out, dogs barking with excitement. Hannah hung back, suddenly uncertain. The winter had changed her. She'd learned the Apache language in bits and pieces, helped with daily tasks, slowly earned acceptance through quiet persistence. But she was still an outsider, a white woman whose presence some merely tolerated for Silent Wolf's sake. She watched from the edge of camp as he dismounted, speaking with the elders in rapid Apache she could only partially follow. His eyes searched the gathering crowd until they found her, and something in his expression made her heart race. Hannah, one of the women, Yellowbird, touched her arm. He brings marriage gifts, many horses, fine blankets, silver from Mexico. You understand. Hannah's breath caught. Marriage gifts? In Apache tradition. A man brought such offerings to prove his worth, to show he could provide for a wife and her family. But she had no family here, no one to accept gifts on her behalf. I don't know the proper way, she admitted. Yellowbird smiled, not unkindly. No one expects you to know, but you must decide. Accept gifts, become his wife by our law. Refuse, and he will not ask again. Apache men do not beg. As the sun peaked overhead, Silent Wolf approached her. He'd bathed in the river. She could tell his hair still damp, wearing his finest clothes. The gathered people fell quiet, watching. Hannah Grace, he said formally, loud enough for all to hear. I bring gifts. 2 warriors led forward a string of horses, beautiful animals, well-fed and strong. Others laid out blankets of intricate weaving, baskets of dried meat and herbs, jewelry of silver and turquoise. It was wealth by any standard, Apache or white. I offer these for the woman who saved my life. Silent Wolf continued. The woman who chose mercy over safety, who suffered exile for showing kindness to enemy. I offer these to show I can provide, protect, cherish what is mine. The silence stretched as everyone waited for her response. Hannah looked at the gifts, at the watching faces. Finally, at Silent Wolf himself. In his dark eyes, she saw not just the warrior who'd collapsed at her door, but the man who'd taught her to survive, who'd returned for her when she was dying, who offered now not just marriage but belonging. I have no family to accept for me, she said, voice carrying clear. No father, no brothers, no clan. Then accept for yourself. Silent Wolf replied, Apache women are not property to be bought. They choose. I ask you to choose. Hannah thought of the cabin standing empty somewhere beyond the mountains, of Thomas's grave she would never visit again, of the life she'd left behind safe, predictable, slowly strangling her spirit. I accept, she said simply. The camp erupted in celebration. Women surrounded her, chattering excitedly about preparations needed. Men congratulated Silent Wolf with backslaps and warrior whoops. Children raced between everyone's legs, caught up in the excitement. That evening, Yellowbird and the other women prepared Hannah for the ceremony. They dressed her in soft doeskin decorated with beadwork, braided her hair with feathers and silver ornaments, painted her face with sacred designs. Looking at her reflection in the still water of a pot, Hannah barely recognized herself. You are nervous, Yellowbird observed. Everything is different from what I knew, Hannah admitted. White women marry in churches, wear white dresses, promise to obey. Apache women promise to stand beside, not behind. Yellowbird said, to be partner, not servant. This frightens you. No, Hannah said after a moment. It frees me. The ceremony took place as sunset painted the sky crimson. It was unlike any wedding Hannah had imagined. No preacher, no Bible readings, no organ music. Instead, there was drumming and chanting, the smell of sage smoke, the entire community participating in ancient rituals. Silent Wolf took her hands as the medicine man spoke words Hannah only partially understood, something about two paths becoming one, about strength joined to strength. They drank from the same cup, ate from the same bowl, stood together as blankets were wrapped around them both, symbolizing their union. When it was done, the feasting began. Hannah found herself swept into dancing she didn't know, laughing as children taught her the steps. The warriors who'd ridden with Silent Wolf told stories of their raid not for violence, but to gather the marriage gifts through trading and legitimate means. They'd traveled far, dealt with Mexican traders, earned every horse and blanket honestly. "You did all this for marriage gifts?" Hannah asked Silent Wolf later, when they could speak privately. "Did more for less worthy causes," he replied. "Besides, needed to show my people you are worth any price. Some questioned welcoming white woman. Now they see I value you above wealth, above ease, above safety." As the celebration continued around them, he told her of his winter, the long healing, the planning, the arguments with those who said he was foolish to return for her. "Why did you?" she asked. "You were free, safe. Why risk coming back?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the dancers circle the fire. "You know the eagle on our sacred mountain? Every dawn, he flies from nest to hunting grounds. Every sunset, returns. Men try to catch him, steal his feathers, but he always escapes, always returns to same nest." He looked at her. "I am that eagle. You are my nest. Would return through 1,000 dangers." Hannah felt tears threaten. "I'm not sure I deserve such devotion." "Not about deserving, about choosing." He touched her face gently. "You chose me when bleeding on your doorstep. I choose you now and always. This is Apache way, loyalty for loyalty, courage for courage, heart for heart." Later, in the lodge that was now theirs, Hannah lay beside her new husband and marveled at the strangeness of it all. 6 months ago, she'd been a proper widow in a Christian settlement. Now she was wife to an Apache warrior, learning new ways, new words, new worlds. "Regrets?" Silent Wolf asked in the darkness. Hannah thought of the women who'd shunned her in town, the life she'd lost, the certainties she'd abandoned. Then she thought of the winter dying alone, of empty years stretching ahead in that cabin, of a half-life disguised as respectability. "None," she said firmly. "Only gratitude." "For what?" "For that storm that brought you to my door, for your wound that made you stay, for every choice that led to this moment." She found his hand in the darkness, intertwined their fingers. "I spent 3 years as widow. Tonight, finally, I am wife again, but more than that, I am alive again." Silent Wolf pulled her close, and she felt the steady beat of his heart against her back. Outside, the celebration was winding down, voices fading into night sounds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning to be fully part of the tribe, navigating between two worlds, finding her place in this life so different from anything she'd known. But tonight, wrapped in buffalo robes and her husband's arms, Hannah felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. Not just love, though that was there, surprising and strong, but belonging, purpose, the sense that she was exactly where she needed to be. "My Apache name," Silent Wolf murmured against her hair. "One who sees through, but you need Apache name too. Have been thinking." "What name?" she asked sleepily. "Woman who opens doors," he said, "because you opened door to enemy, opened heart to new ways, opened path between worlds. Good name, yes." "Yes," Hannah whispered. "Very good name." As sleep took her, she smiled. Tomorrow she would be woman who opens doors, learning to live as Apache wife. But part of her would always be Hannah Grace, who'd chosen mercy on a stormy night and discovered that sometimes The most dangerous choices lead to the most beautiful destinations. The autumn sun hung low in the sky when the soldiers found them. Hannah was gathering pinyon nuts with the other women when the cry went up blue coats on the eastern ridge, riding hard toward their camp. Her basket fell from nerveless fingers as memories of Sheriff Elwood flooded back. "Run!" Yellowbird shouted, but it was too late. The cavalry had planned well, sweeping down from 3 directions, cutting off escape routes. Within minutes, the peaceful camp became a scene of controlled chaos as soldiers rounded up the Apache band. Hannah found herself face to face with a young lieutenant, his eyes widening in shock at her white features beneath the Apache dress and ornaments. "Ma'am, are you a captive?" Before she could answer, Silent Wolf appeared at her side, placing himself slightly between her and the soldier. His hand rested on his knife, though he made no move to draw it. "I'm no captive," Hannah said clearly. "I'm here by choice." The lieutenant's expression shifted from concern to disgust. "By choice, living with savages." "Living with my husband," she corrected firmly. The soldier's face darkened. Behind him, she could see other troops herding the Apache people into groups, weapons trained on warriors who stood with deadly stillness. Children cried as they clung to their mothers. "Sergeant," the lieutenant called. "We've got a white woman here. Says she's married to one of them." What followed was swift and brutal in its efficiency. The soldiers separated her from Silent Wolf despite her protests, binding his hands along with the other warriors. When Hannah tried to intervene, a burly sergeant grabbed her arms. "Ma'am, we're here to rescue you," he said, though his grip was far from gentle. "These Indians are being relocated to the reservation. You'll be taken back to civilization where you belong." "I belong with my husband." Hannah struggled against his hold. "You have no right." "Actually, we do." A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Sheriff Elwood rode through the crowd of soldiers, his star glinting in the late afternoon sun. "Mrs. Grace, or should I say, Mrs. Apache now." Hannah's blood ran cold. "Sheriff, been looking for you since last winter," he said, dismounting slowly. "Imagine my surprise when the army mentioned finding a white woman among this band. Knew it had to be you." "I've committed no crime," Hannah said, lifting her chin despite her fear. "Haven't you?" Elwood stepped closer. "Harboring a wanted criminal, lying to a peace officer, fleeing justice, and now living in sin with a savage. Plenty of crimes there, I'd say." "We're married by Apache law." "Apache law," Elwood laughed harshly. "That's no law at all. You're still legally the widow Grace in the eyes of Colorado territory. Living with a man outside Christian marriage? That's a scandal that needs addressing." The lieutenant looked uncomfortable. "Sheriff, our orders are just to relocate the Indians to the reservation. The woman can choose." "The hell she can," Elwood interrupted. "This woman is wanted for questioning in my jurisdiction. I'm taking her back to Redemption Hill to face justice." Hannah looked desperately toward Silent Wolf. He was watching her, his dark eyes intense with controlled fury. Around them, the other Apache were being loaded onto army wagons, their few possessions scattered and abandoned. "Please," Hannah said to the lieutenant, "at least let me go with them to the reservation. I'm his wife." "You're nothing of the sort," Elwood snapped. "Sergeant, put her in my wagon. We've got a long ride back to town." As the sergeant dragged her away, Hannah heard Silent Wolf speak for the first time, his voice carrying clear and strong. "I will come for you." Elwood laughed. "From the reservation, good luck with that. Indian. They'll shoot you if you try to leave." But Silent Wolf's eyes never left Hannah's face. "I will come," he repeated in Apache, words meant only for her. "As sun rises, as eagle returns to nest, wait for me." Then she was in Elwood's wagon, hands tied to prevent escape, watching as the convoy separated the army wagons heading north to the reservation. Elwood's wagon turning south toward Redemption Hill and whatever justice he had in mind. The journey took 3 days. Elwood kept her tied except when necessary, treating her more like prisoner than rescued woman. He spoke little, but when he did, his words dripped with disgust. Thomas Grace was a good man, he said one evening by the campfire. Must be spinning in his grave, knowing his widow took up with a murdering savage. Silent Wolf never murdered anyone, Hannah said wearily. They'd had this argument before. 3 men died because of him. 3 men died fighting each other over bounty money. He was already gone. Elwood spat into the fire. Details. Point is, you chose them over your own kind. There'll be a reckoning for that. As they neared Redemption Hill, Hannah's dread grew. What waited for her there, jail a trial or worse frontier justice delivered by angry townspeople who'd spent a year nursing their hatred? The answer came as they rolled down Main Street. People emerged from shops and houses, following the wagon with hard eyes and harder words. Indian lover, someone shouted. Traitor, called another. By the time they reached the jail, a crowd had gathered. Lock her up. Sheriff Willard the blacksmith stood at the front, face red with righteous anger. Woman like that ain't fit for decent society. Now hold on. Doc Morrison pushed through the crowd. This is still America. Woman's entitled to proper justice, not mob rule. Justice, Willard sneered. Where was justice when she was hiding that Apache, when she was living in sin with him? The crowd murmured agreement, pressing closer. Hannah saw faces she'd known for years twisted with hate misses. Patterson from the church, Samuel from the bank, even young Amy Henderson, who'd always been sweet and shy. Fear crawled up her spine as she recognized the mood. She'd seen it before, when they'd hanged those cattle rustlers without trial. Inside, quick, Elwood muttered, seeming to realize he might have awakened something he couldn't control. He hustled her into the jail, slamming the door against the crowd. Sheriff, Hannah said urgently. You know what they're capable of when riled. Whatever you plan. What I plan is a proper trial, he said, though he looked uneasy. Judge Collins will be through next week. Until then, you'll stay locked up, for your own safety as much as anything. The cell was small and cold. With a narrow cot and a bucket, Hannah sank onto the thin mattress, overwhelmed by the turn of events. This morning she'd been gathering nuts under the autumn sun, surrounded by people who'd become family. Now she was caged, waiting for judgment from those who'd already condemned her. Through the barred window, she could hear the crowd still gathered outside, their voices an angry buzz. Someone started preaching about the dangers of race mixing, about white women who forgot their place. Others called for immediate judgment, no trial needed. As darkness fell, the crowd finally dispersed, though Hannah suspected they hadn't gone far. She lay on the narrow cot, thinking of Silent Wolf, wondering if he'd already reached the reservation. Were the others safe? Had anyone been hurt in the roundup? I will come for you, he'd said, but how could he? The reservation was guarded, watched. Any Apache leaving without permission would be shot, and even if by some miracle he escaped, returning here would be suicide. The whole town would be watching for him. No, Hannah realized with a sinking heart. She was truly alone this time. Whatever happened at the trial, if there even was a trial, she would face it without hope of rescue. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, a strange calm settled over her. She'd made her choices with open eyes, saved a wounded enemy, learned to see beyond the barriers others built, found love where she'd least expected it. Even if they hanged her tomorrow, she wouldn't regret any of it. Woman who opens doors, she whispered to the darkness, touching the hidden medicine bundle at her throat, a gift from Silent Wolf she'd managed to conceal. I open doors all right, and I'd do it again. Outside, she heard footsteps, voices discussing guard schedules. They were taking no chances, making sure she couldn't escape and no one could break her out. Hannah closed her eyes. seeing not the cell walls but mountain vistas, cooking fires under stars, her husband's face in firelight. Whatever came next, she would meet it with the same courage that had led her to drag a dying Apache warrior in from the storm. She was no longer the frightened widow clinging to an empty life. She was woman who opens doors, and no cage could change that. The day of judgment came with frost on the windows and fear in the air. Hannah stood at the barred opening, watching the sun rise over Redemption Hill for what might be the last time. 7 days she'd been locked in this cell. 7 days of angry crowds gathering outside, of shouted threats and thrown stones. Judge Collins had never arrived. The circuit rider sent word he was delayed by early snows in the mountain passes. Sheriff Elwood grew more nervous with each passing day as the town's mood darkened. Even Doc Morrison stopped coming after someone threw a brick through his window for defending her. In now. As Hannah dressed in the same Apache clothing she'd been wearing when captured, she'd refused the proper dress misses. Patterson had brought she heard the crowd gathering again, but something was different. The voices were hushed, expectant rather than angry. Mrs. Grace. Sheriff Elwood appeared at her cell, keys jangling. It's time. Time for what the judge hasn't come. His face was grim. Town council met last night, decided we can't wait for Collins. They're going to decide your fate themselves. Frontier justice. Hannah had feared this. That's not legal. Nothing about this situation is legal, Elwood muttered. But I can't hold them off anymore. Willard and the others. They've got the whole town worked up. Either I bring you out, or they come in and take you. Hannah lifted her chin. Then I'll walk out on my own feet. The main street was packed with people. A makeshift platform had been erected near the general store, and Hannah's eyes went immediately to the rope hanging from a hastily constructed gallows. So that was to be her fate. But as Elwood led her through the crowd, something strange happened. From the back of the gathering came a disturbance, horses pushing through. Voices raised in alarm. The crowd parted reluctantly, revealing riders Hannah had never expected to see again. Apache warriors, 20 of them, painted for war, rifles across their saddles, and at their head, Silent Wolf, sitting tall on a painted pony. The crowd fell silent, frozen between fear and shock. Weapons appeared in white hands, but nobody fired, not with Apache rifles trained steadily on them. I have come, Silent Wolf said, his voice carrying clear across the street. For my wife. You can't be here, Elwood stepped forward, hand on his pistol. You're supposed to be on the reservation. Reservation not hold warriors when innocent woman faces rope. Silent Wolf replied. We come in peace, but leave in war if needed. Willard pushed to the front of the crowd. This is our town. Our justice, you savages have no say here. Silent Wolf's eyes found him. You talk of justice. Where is justice in hanging woman for showing mercy? Where is justice in punishing kindness? He raised his voice so all could hear. This woman saved my life when your law said let me die. She chose compassion over comfort. Now you would kill her for it. She chose you over her own kind, someone shouted. She chose humanity over hatred. Silent Wolf countered. Is this crime in your world? The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Hannah saw fingers tightening on triggers, knew that bloodshed balanced on a knife's edge. Then another voice spoke from an unexpected quarter. He's right. Sarah Morrison stepped out of the crowd, baby on her hip, chin raised defiantly. Hannah Grace helped birth this child when I was dying. She's tended our sick, comforted our grieving, asked nothing in return but neighborly kindness. She looked around at her neighbors. And this is how we repay her with a rope. She harbored a criminal, Willard protested. She harbored a wounded man. Mrs. Morrison shot back. Since when is that a hanging offense? Other voices began to rise, some supporting Willard, others questioning. The unity of the mob began to fracture. Hannah saw doubt creeping into faces that had been hard with certainty moments before. Silent Wolf used the moment of uncertainty to dismount. He walked forward slowly, hands visible, until he stood before the platform. "I offer trade," he announced. "Me for her. You want Apache to hang, take me. Let her go free." "No!" The word tore from Hannah's throat. She tried to move toward him, but Elwood held her back. Silent Wolf didn't look at her, keeping his eyes on the crowd. "This is fair trade. Yes, you get Apache warrior, bounty money. She gets freedom, justice satisfied." The crowd murmured, tempted by the offer. Willard's eyes glinted with greed. The bounty on Silent Wolf had grown to $1,000. "Don't listen to him," Hannah pleaded. "He's done nothing wrong. The sacred items he took were stolen from his people first. He killed no one. You'd be hanging an innocent man." "Innocent," Willard sneered. "No Apache is innocent." "Then neither am I," Hannah said firmly, "because I stand with him. His people became my people. His ways became my ways. If loving across boundaries is a crime, then I'm guilty, but I won't apologize for it, and I won't watch you hang him for being who he is." She looked around at the faces she'd known for years. Thomas used to read from the Bible every night, "Love thy neighbor." He'd say, "Judge not, lest you be judged." What would he think of us now? What would any of our departed think, seeing us ready to hang a woman for saving a life? In the silence that followed, she saw some faces soften, others harden further. The town stood divided, fear and hatred warring with conscience and memory. Then Silent Wolf spoke again, this time in Apache. His warriors shifted, and suddenly Hannah understood. They wouldn't let him trade himself. If the town tried to take either of them, blood would flow. "Enough," Sheriff Elwood said suddenly, loudly. "Everyone stand down." He looked exhausted, older than his years. "This has gone far enough. Mrs. Grace, or whatever she calls herself, now broke no written law. Helping a wounded man isn't a crime, regardless of his race. And unauthorized trials, that's something I won't be part of." "You can't just let her go," Willard raged. "Watch me." Elwood unlocked Hannah's shackles. "She's free to leave, and if anyone tries to stop her, they'll answer to the law, the real law, not mob rule." The crowd stirred uneasily, but no one moved to challenge him. Perhaps they saw the Apache rifles, or perhaps Sarah Morrison's words had found their mark. Either way, the path to Silent Wolf remained clear. Hannah walked toward him on unsteady legs, hardly believing this was real. When she reached him, he pulled her up onto his horse in one smooth motion, settling her before him. "This isn't over," Willard shouted. "You can't just ride off into the sunset like some fairy tale." Silent Wolf looked down at him. "No fairy tale, just man and woman choosing love over fear." He gathered the reins. "We go now. Do not follow." As they rode out, Hannah looked back one last time. The town that had been her world seemed small from here, the angry faces already fading into memory. Ahead lay the mountains, purple with distance, promising freedom and challenge in equal measure. "Your people," she said softly. "The reservation." "Some stay, some go," Silent Wolf replied. "Government promises proven false many times. We find new ways, hidden valleys they don't know. You and I, we make new path between worlds." They rode in silence for a while, the war party spreading out around them in protective formation. As Redemption Hill disappeared behind a rise, Hannah felt the last chains of her old life fall away. "Do you regret?" Silent Wolf asked, his arm tightening around her. Hannah thought of Thomas's grave she'd never visit again, the cabin standing empty, the life she'd known crumbling to dust. Then she thought of winter nights by Apache fires, of learning to see the world through different eyes, of love that transcended every boundary others tried to build. "No," she said, leaning back against his warmth. "No regrets, only gratitude." "For what?" "For storms that bring unexpected gifts. For doors that open when we're brave enough to walk through them. For warriors who keep their promises." She smiled. You said you'd come for me. Said it, meant it. Apache warriors' word is sacred. As they climbed higher into the foothills, the war party began to sing a traveling song. Yellowbird had taught her. Hannah found herself joining in, her voice mixing with theirs in the ancient melody. Behind them, the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of fire. Ahead, the mountains rose like promises, sheltering valleys where Apache and white woman could build something new, something unprecedented. She was no longer Hannah Grace, the widow, no longer just woman who opens doors. She was something new, a bridge between worlds, proof that love could flourish where hatred said it was impossible. The path ahead would be hard. She knew there would be challenges, dangers, those on both sides who wouldn't understand. But riding through the gathering dusk, surrounded by warriors who'd risked everything to bring her home, held by the man who'd seen past surface differences to the heart beneath, Hannah knew she'd found her true place at last. Not in the town that cast her out, not in the cabin that had become a tomb, but here, in the space between two worlds, creating something new with every mile they traveled. The stars emerged one by one as they rode deeper into Apache lands. And Hannah smiled. She'd been woman who opens doors. Now she was simply a woman who'd walked through one, and found on the other side a love worth any price, a life worth any risk, a future bright with possibility. The Apache traveling song rose higher, echoing off canyon walls, carrying far across the darkening land a song of journeys completed and journeys just begun, of hearts that found each other across impossible divides, of courage rewarded and love triumphant. And somewhere in that song, Hannah heard her own story, the poor widow who hid the Apache everyone wanted dead, who paid the price for mercy, and discovered that sometimes the most dangerous choices lead to the most beautiful destinations. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales from the American Wild West. Please leave a comment below sharing your location so we can connect and share our thoughts about Hannah and Silent Wolf's incredible journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button so more people can discover and enjoy these authentic frontier tales. Your support means everything.